All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are cracking open the cold case file on what is honestly one of history's most chilling, just absolutely baffling mysteries. We're going to put on our detective hats and adopt a strict forensic lens to look at the raw evidence of a crime that has literally frustrated investigators for over a century. We are heading all the way back to 1922 to a super remote Bavarian farmstead to investigate a massacre where the evidence, well, it raises way more questions than it answers. Okay, so I want to hit you with the most jarring fact right out of the gate here. Picture this. You're living on an isolated farm, surrounded by nothing but dense woods. One night, an entire family of 6 is brutally slaughtered. But the perpetrator didn't just flee into the darkness. No way. Instead, after committing these horrific acts, the killer stayed right there on the property. They cooked meals in the kitchen. They tended to the farm. They literally lived among their victims for days. And this right here perfectly illustrates why the Hinterkaifeck case is so psychologically terrifying. We aren't just looking for a murderer, we're looking for a phantom who made themselves right at home.
Section 1. The Hinterkaifeck Crime Scene.
To really grasp what happened, we've got to set the scene. Germany at this time was still heavily struggling to recover from the devastation of World War I. And tucked away in these really dense Bavarian woodlands lived the household we're looking at today. You've got Andreas Gruber, he's the head of the family, and his wife, Kazilia. Living with them was their widowed daughter, Victoria, along with her 2 young children, young Kazilia, and a 2-year-old grandson named Joseph. And finally, we have Maria Baumgartner. She was the newly hired maid. And pay attention to this incredibly tragic detail for our timeline. Maria had only been on the farm for a few hours before the attack went down. From the outside, life on this quiet, geographically isolated farm looked totally normal. But trust me, it wasn't. Moving on to Section 2, Pre-Murder Warning Signs. So, in cold case investigations, crimes of this magnitude rarely just happen in a vacuum, right? Let's walk through this forensic timeline, because you can literally see the threat escalating. Several months prior, the previous maid suddenly up and quit. Why? Because she was absolutely terrified by mysterious footsteps and noises she kept hearing up in the attic. Then, jump to just days prior to the massacre. House keys mysteriously go missing, and an unknown newspaper from Munich suddenly appears on the farm, which is super weird because nobody in the house subscribed to it. Andreas Gruber even reported hearing footsteps above the ceiling, but when he searched the attic, he found nothing. But actually, here's the detail that literally sends shivers down my spine. Just days before the murders, Andreas found footprints in the snow. They led from the surrounding forest directly toward the farmhouse. But the chilling part? There were 0 footprints leading back. Someone had arrived, but nobody had left.
Section 3. Anatomy of the attack. As darkness fell over the countryside on Friday, March 31st, 1922, something incredibly deadly was put into motion. Investigators have systematically reconstructed the terrifying luring tactics used that night. Somehow, 4 of the family members were drawn out toward the barn, one at a time. We don't know exactly how the killer pulled this off. Maybe they made a noise, or maybe someone they recognized and trusted called out to them. Whatever it was, the tactic worked flawlessly. One by one, they entered the barn, and one by one, they were attacked. The killer used a really heavy farming tool known as a mattock to inflict devastating injuries. Forensically speaking, what really stands out here is that there was almost no evidence of a defensive struggle. None. This tells us that each victim was caught completely and totally by surprise. After neutralizing the 4 family members in the barn, Andreas, Kazilia, Victoria, and young Kazilia, the nightmare was still not over. The killer then moved directly into the farmhouse. Inside, they found the brand new maid, Maria, in her room, and the 2-year-old toddler, Josef. Both were murdered. In just one single night, the entire household had been completely wiped out. And because the farm was so isolated, the bodies wouldn't even be discovered by neighbors for another 4 days. Mail just piled up, and their absence from church went entirely unnoticed. Section 4. Analyzing the physical evidence. Now, as an investigator, I have to acknowledge a massive hurdle right up front. The crime scene was horribly contaminated by local neighbors before the police ever even arrived. Objects were moved, vital areas were totally trampled over. But we have to deduce the killer's motive by comparing the evidence we do have. First up, let's look at the robbery motive. Honestly, this theory completely falls apart. Why? Because investigators found that a ton of money and valuables were left completely untouched. Nothing significant was missing. Now contrast that with a personal motive. The attacks were unbelievably sudden, brutal, and bizarrely, the killer chose to hang around the farm. If money wasn't the goal, then what the heck was? Was it revenge? Deep-seated hatred? Some crazy family dispute? The physical evidence points entirely away from a random passing thief. Which brings us right back to the absolute most chilling piece of evidence in this entire case.
After wiping out 6 people, the killer just stayed. The farm animals were actively fed. Meals were prepped and eaten right out of the family's pantry. Smoke was seen casually rising from the chimney for days. Just think about the psychological profile of a killer who does this. Why on earth would you risk being caught by staying at the exact scene of a mass murder? It suggests a terrifying level of confidence, a really deep familiarity with farming chores, or maybe a highly disturbing emotional connection to the property itself. Which leads us to Section 5, Evaluating the Suspect Theories. Over the last century, police have interviewed literally countless witnesses, former employees, and local criminals. Let's systematically weigh how the leading theories hold up against our forensic evidence. First up, a neighbor. We actually know one neighbor had a really complicated relationship with the family, which perfectly fits that personal, non-robbery motive. Next, former workers. This theory brilliantly aligns with the post-murder evidence. A former farmhand would know exactly how to feed those animals, operate the farm, and it might even explain those missing house keys. What about wandering criminals? Well, actually, scratch that. Like we discussed, that idea totally collapses when faced with all those undisturbed valuables. Finally, multiple attackers. Now, this is a very compelling theory. It could easily explain the tough logistics of successfully luring and subduing 4 separate people in a barn without raising any alarms. Every single one of these theories explains some of the details, but you know what? Not a single one of them perfectly explains the whole shebang. And that leads us to this incredibly frustrating reality. Quote, "No person has ever been convicted, no confession has ever been verified." Decades have turned into a full-blown century. The farmhouse itself was even eventually demolished. Modern detectives and historical researchers have revisited these witness statements time and time again, applying advanced forensic reviews to the old files, but no definitive answer has ever emerged. The shadows of Hinterkaifeck completely, stubbornly refuse to reveal their secrets. So we've laid out the timeline. The missing keys, those creepy one-way footprints in the snow, the voices, and the attic. And a killer who somehow vanished without a single trace after making breakfast and feeding the farm animals of the family they just slaughtered. So here's the deal. We need your analytical minds on this one. Look at the evidence we've unpacked in this explainer today. Who do you think was responsible? And seriously, why on earth did they stay behind? Take a second, evaluate the clues we just went over, and drop your own deductions down in the comments below. Because until the truth is finally uncovered, the Hinterkaifeck murders are going to remain one of history's darkest, most mind-boggling unsolved mysteries.